and welcome to another TOG chat. I'm Robert Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group, and I'm joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs, senior philanthropy for the Osborne Group. Hi, Laurel.
Hello.
Happy 2024, first of all. Hope everyone's 2024 is off to a good start. So we were talking, and you told me that you have a new mantra. So let's hear it and talk about it.
I do. So, anyone who's been working with me so far in 2024 has heard this, that I have a mantra for the year. And my mantra for the year is trust, engagement, impact. It's not fancy. It's pretty straightforward. But what I've been saying to a lot of my clients and folks that we're chatting with across the sector is, there's so many things. This is such a big year. There's, a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of potential threats. There's a lot of things going on. I feel like I can't open my email without reading some news story about the giving crisis and, dips and declines in donors and all of the challenges that are facing fundraisers. This job has always been really hard, and I think it just kind of continues to be hard and potentially is going to be even harder this year. And so as I've been thinking about all of the studies I've been reading and all of the information that I've been sifting through over the course of the last few months, the three things that have really jumped out at me as potentially having a huge impact on our ability to raise money, not just this year, but in perpetuity, is our ability to really build true, authentic trust with our donors. And we're just hearing, and we'll talk about this more as we get into this, but we're hearing a lot of data, particularly with younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, and even Gen X, data about trust in institutions generally, but trust in nonprofits declining. And I think trust has always been important, but probably more important than it's ever been. I think we're hearing a lot about the role of impact in our work, not just telling donors, and we actually did a whole TOG chat, which we'll link in the box below if you're watching this on YouTube, about kind of moving beyond just saying thank you and your stewardship, but really demonstrating impact and why that matters. And then I think the third thing that you and I, Bob, I feel like the Osborne Group has always talked about this, but I think it's more significant now than ever, is the role of engagement, and not just pushing out one-way communication, not just kind of communicating to our donors, but actually engaging people in our work, getting people to participate, getting people to do something. So important. So that's my mantra: trust, impact, and engagement. Maybe I'd love to dive in and hear your thoughts. Maybe let's start with trust. I know you talk about this a lot. I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I heard your mantra, I was like, yes, I agree. I'm with you on this mantra. And like you said, when I do workshops or webinars, I talk about trust all the time. But I don't think that you and I have ever really had a conversation about trust. And I think it's just really, really important. And I think, as you pointed out, I think the world is very aware of the lack of trust in institutions. It's all too clear, unfortunately, that that's an issue. But I'm not sure that we know as a sector like what to do with that, and what does that trust look like in action, and how do we build that trust, and how do we use that as something that helps us with our fundraising. And so, one, I think, I always start by talking about the fact that that people might find our organization or us trustworthy, but that trust really very much is a learned experience, right? Like, you trust the people that you trust because they follow through, they do what they say they're going to do. It's very experiential, and really understanding, like, is this person actually trusted, as opposed to, I'm going to believe that you're trustworthy, but I don't necessarily trust you. And so, one is just going in with that understanding, because I mean, how many assessments have you and I done over the years where once we start having those confidential conversations, people will say to us, like, we really like the organization, we really, we think they're great, but, I don't know what's going to happen if I give them a name, or I don't know if they can pull off what they say they're going to pull off. And so there's that goodwill that I think usually exists when we're working with donors, but it's not the same as like, I know that this person is competent. I know this organization is competent. I know this person is going to follow through. And so one, I think it's just really important to remember that. And then two, I think it's really important to demonstrate that as much as possible in a practical sort of way, meaning like, do you have a plan and do you share it with people? Are you explicit about how you're going to interact with a volunteer, once they've agreed to do something? Like, is all that transparent? Are you clear about what your role is in the donor process, and not just what you're hoping a donor will do or what you're hoping a volunteer will do, but like, what are you going to do and how can you demonstrate competence and trust? And so for me, that's the important part of this, because I think intuitively we get that this is really important, but I don't know that we spend a lot of our time trying to show donors and volunteers that, yeah, we are worthy of your trust. We know what we're doing and we have a plan and we're transparent about it and we're happy to talk to you about it at any time. But when you think about it, what do you think about?
I think the other part, I think everything you just said, completely agree. I think the one other element I would add is kind of the way that trust and impact intersect with one another. Is, I think that the other place where we're potentially losing trust in folks is that we aren't always really explicit about our impact. We're pretty good at telling people what we're going to do. We're not always really great at telling people what we're going to achieve because we did those things, or that the things we're doing are achieving anything or making the change in the world that we're telling people we're going to have. And so I think that there's, in a lot of ways, I think we're seeing a lot of drop off in the number of people who are giving. And I think part of that is, have we, the collective nonprofit sector, have we done a very good job at proving to people that we're actually making the difference that we say we're going to make? And I think that's where, the intersection of trust and impact really becomes important. We have to be able to say to people, if you invest your time or your money or your, intellectual capital or whatever it is in our organization, that it's going to produce something, that it's going to be worthwhile, that we're going to make the best use of it that we can, and it's going to produce some impact at the end. And if I can't demonstrate that to you in a tangible, compelling, exciting, authentic, real way, that starts to erode at trust. So I think there's, a piece of this where the better we are at really demonstrating impact in a real, authentic way, is also going to help us all go a long way in terms of continuing to build that trust with folks.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about here at the Osborne Group about the promise, right? Like, when we ask for money or time or whatever, that we're making a promise to our donors that if you give us money today, something will be different tomorrow. But then we have to deliver on that promise, because you gave money, time yesterday. Here's what's different today, and be really clear about that, and deliver it in a way that, because we do live in a society where we get a lot of information thrown at us. I think a lot of times people will just say, well, I do that. I sent out this one email, or I did this one thing. And I think part of this too is understanding that you have to demonstrate it over and over again. You do have to communicate it, again and again and again, to make sure, to get the value out of it, to really build that trust, because people may not read every email you send. They may not open their mail, and if they don't open the email, or don't open that envelope, then that trust isn't necessarily being built. And it's the least we owe our donors. And again, we're not saying that they've done something, right? We're not saying they've done everything. We're not saying that, this is a collective experience that we're all working together on, but that money did something, right? And we owe it to that donor to tell them whatever whatever that is, and hopefully in a way, like you said, that's compelling and interesting.
Yeah, which I guess then kind of gets us to the intersection of those two things with the third part of the mantra, right? Which is engagement. And, everything you just said about, we don't know if people are going to open the piece of mail or read their email. And, this day and age, I can't tell you, Bob, the number of calls I'm having with clients right now where it's like, how do I get a meeting scheduled if somebody won't pick up the phone? How am I supposed to build a relationship when I can't get them to open their emails from me? And, I think we are at a really interesting, maybe a little scary, but I think exciting point in the history of philanthropy where a lot of the things that have been tried and true techniques for fundraisers for the past 30, 40 years aren't working anymore. And I think we have to take a really hard look at what we do, why we do it, and actually measure whether or not the things we're doing are working. And if they're not working, try some other things. And when I'm talking to clients about what are those things that you're trying, they almost always have to do with, is this engagement? Not how are we pushing out different messaging? How are we, changing the font on our, email post? It's what are we doing that's actually trying to engage people, and doing it in a way that's different than we've tried to do it before, because people don't pick up their phones, people aren't reading their emails. We have to find other ways. And again, if we can't figure out how to engage people, then we're not going to build trust, and we're not going to be able to really demonstrate impact in a compelling way, like we can when we actually can get people to do something, right? So, how we figure out engagement, and I don't necessarily have answers about what this looks like, but boy, am I excited to try some things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think in a lot of ways, engagement is sort of the antidote to the lack of trust, right? Because the person that you do trust is yourself, right? Like you trust your own experiences, you trust your own eyes, you trust your own ears, you trust, what you've gone through. That's the thing that you can rely on. And so to the extent when we're fundraising that we try to push information at people and try to tell them things. One, there's lots of evidence, like empirical scientific research that doesn't really stick, right? And increasingly in our polarized society, it's become very clear that it's pretty hard to convince people of anything, right? If they believe something, they kind of believe it, and you're probably not going to change their mind, but people can change their own minds. And they can change their own minds by engaging with your organization in some way so that they can see the value in what you do, not because you said it was valuable, but because they experienced that value in some way for themselves. And they're going to remember what they did and how the experience that they had, and they're going to believe that experience because it's their own experience. And so I think that's really the value of engagement, and that's very much the anecdote, the antidote to the lack of trust. Plus, there's increasing evidence, I think, that younger donors and certainly younger donors and people of color, but I would say just in general, this younger, more diverse generation, that this is the way they think about it. Like they don't have institutional loyalty. They really, are seeing what's out there and who's doing the best job, and they're gonna learn that through their own experience in some way and through engaging, and that's how they would like to interact with organizations. They don't want information just pushed at them through direct marketing and the like. And so to your point, I think our generation, I'm going to lump you into, I'm pretty sure you're Gen X with me. You're
I
probably, okay, yeah, you're at the tail end, but, I think our generation is probably still, somewhere in between sort of the more traditional ways of approaching philanthropy and maybe, and the way millennials and Gen Z are approaching philanthropy. So, the traditional stuff can still work, but I think to your point, we are in transition and we're headed in a very different direction, and we are going to have to figure out as a sector, what does that engagement look like, and how do we scale it? So I'm with you. I'm very interested in how we approach that. I think you and I are both pretty sure that this is the answer, but maybe not as sure about this, how to scale that work in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and we've for a long time at the Osborne Group been big proponents of things like vision meetings, as both prospecting tools and engagement tools, having group opportunities for people to come and have two-way discussion and engagement, both with the organization and with other donors. And we've for years talked to folks about doing this, and people get really excited about doing it. And then for any number of reasons, I see organizations struggle to get it off the ground as a strategy. I don't know that I can point to a lot of folks who've really dedicated the time and resources and energy to making it stick and really making it do something. I still believe that's a great place to start for folks. And if anybody listening to this is like, I don't know what she's talking about, I want to learn more, like definitely reach out to us. We can talk more about what that looks like. But I'm I have so many clients who will, the whole thing about, well, I had $1,000 donor and I tried calling them and they won't pick up the phone or they don't want to meet with me. And I think, well, if I via direct mail or something sent you 500 bucks or $1,000, and then suddenly some person's calling me and wanting to take me out to coffee, yeah, I don't know that I want to do that either, and I think, how did this ever work, right? And I just think I look at the number of clients I have who will cold call, people who've made, we're going to cold call every person who's made a $25 donation. And they're beating their heads against the wall, wondering why people won't return their phone calls. And I think, well, I don't even always pick up the phone when my mom's calling me, right? I mean, don't show my mom this recording, but like I think just habits have changed so much, and our willingness to engage with people we don't know has changed so much. And there's just that we've got to find a different way, and we've got to be better about using connectors. We've got to be better about figuring out how to use those people who are closest to us to reach out to their communities and engage others that way. There's just so much to this engagement puzzle that I think if we're willing to put the time and the resources into cold calling, like how about we just not do that and we take the time and resources and actually put it into figuring out how to engage people in a meaningful way.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think one, I can't think of anything that will kill an enthusiasm even just for the profession, right? Than cold calling, and it's a complete waste of time, and most of the time, and the expectations around that are really unrealistic and getting more unrealistic every day. But I do think that once we start thinking about this as a sector, we'll come up with answers. I think the problem right now is always that issue with like disruption, right? This is the thing that got you here, the DNA of your organization, the culture of your organization. I mean, we've certainly recommended to clients, that they do things very differently than maybe they've done, that have been traditionally direct mail focused, that have traditionally not really used volunteers and not had a lot of engagement opportunities, and have really dealt with things at a distance. And we've seen firsthand the resistance, right, that there is to changing. And so a big question that I've had in my mind for the last few years is, for those organizations, those legacy, those big organizations that we've all heard of, that are been around for a long time, the whole direct marketing piece was built off of, the greatest generation, or whatever we were calling them, and the boomer generation. That's about to go away. And the question for me is like, is giving is going to go off a big cliff, you know? And maybe that's what spurs us on. I think we're going to find out, soon. I think I think there's an acknowledgement of the problem in the sector, but maybe a reluctance for folks to really experiment with different business models. What I mostly hear people saying is, is just figuring out like how do we do this differently and do the same thing differently,
Yeah.
right? Not like actually do anything differently, but like we're still going to stick with the same model of direct marketing, even though the trends I think are pretty clear. Um, so that I think that'll be interesting. And so I think either folks will figure it out proactively, or we'll have no choice and we'll figure it out. I think either way it'll get solved. But it's just how much pain we experience as a sector before it gets solved.
And that's maybe the biggest shift in engagement is I think for a long time in our business, we thought about engagement as a major gifts strategy. We always would talk about, you got to engage, the more engaged your donors are, the more they'll give. And, that's a gift, kind of a mid-level and major gift strategy. I think the big shift to your whole point about acquisition and prospecting is that this is no longer going to be a major gift issue. This is going to be from at all levels of giving, from your $1 donor to your $1 billion donor. We have to figure out how to engage people in meaningful ways at scale, right? So how we do this for donors at all levels in meaningful ways, meaningful for us, meaningful for them, in scalable ways is going to be really critical, because you're right, mail's gonna stop working at some point. It already kind of has, and email has never taken its place, and text has never taken its place, and phone has never taken its place, and social media has never proven to be the thing that people thought it might be from a acquisition and prospecting perspective. And so yeah, what scalable engagement is where what we've got to figure out.
Well, I think that seems like a good place to leave it. We've diagnosed a problem, but we'll keep we'll keep talking about it, and we do have. I think you and I do have some ideas about how to handle this, and maybe we'll talk about them in future TOG chats. I think again, I think it's more us all experimenting as a sector and seeing what works, and kind of moving in that direction, because we can have our theories about it, but at the end of the day, we have to put them out there in the world and see how they work. So I think we'll leave it there, though. I think maybe next time we'll talk about social media, because that's come up a lot, and people are surprised at how ineffective social media actually is. So that might be a fun a fun thing for us to talk about. But
But
we'll
still
see. We'll leave
potential, right?
it.
Like still ways to
Well, it has
utilize
its
it,
place.
but yeah.
It has its place, but it's right. It's understanding the limitations. But all right, so we'll talk about that next time.
And to wrap everything up, including that, I would just say again, the mantra: trust, engagement, impact. Whatever you decide to do this year, whatever strategies you're going to deploy, whether they're old ones or new ones, trust, engagement, impact. Are you checking the box to make sure you've really intentionally and strategically incorporated those three things into every single thing that you're doing? Because even if you're doing the same old that you've always done, just augmenting those three things can make it so much more impactful for your strategy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this was fun as always, and we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the next TOG chat.